Welcome to Check-In with Jason Lauritsen, where we explore how to create human, connected workplaces that employees love and that fuel organizational success. Each week, I invite someone who is leading the way in this work to join me for a conversation to help educate and inspire us. My guest today is Sheryl Battles. Sheryl is a thought leader, storyteller, and strategist. Earlier this year, she retired from, and wait for it, this is amazing, a 35-year career at Pitney Bowes, an organization historically known for its incredible workplace culture. Sheryl served as Vice President of Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement for the past 6 years. She's also an active community leader on a local and national level. Sheryl, I always love our conversation, so thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here. I had to smile when you talked about my 35 years. Yes, I was indeed a child prodigy. Just wanted you to know that.
That is obvious. That is obvious. And it's impressive. I love that. I think that's a testament to the quality of Pitney Bowes as an organization. First off, that they identified, your talent as a young child and invited you to come to work, and then you stuck around for 35 years. They got to be doing something right. So let's start. I want to check in with you a little bit about your work and maybe a little bit of sort of the passion that drives you. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about the work that you do and the work that you did at Pitney Bowes, because I know you played across a lot of different parts of what we think about as important to creating a great workplace.
Yeah, I really had the privilege of, and that's the wonderful thing about when you find that right fit. You have an ability to do work that matters. And so I always felt that I had the privilege of doing work that mattered. And, the bulk of my career was really in strategic communications. But when you think about what communications really is, it's about, information and instruction and ideas and inspiration. And all of those things are the kinds of elements that really make a culture, that lead to employee engagement, and that help us build the kinds of cultures that bring out the best in all of us. So focusing across those areas, I did everything from executive communication to speech writing for 3 CEOs to financial and investor communication, crisis communication, you name it, I did it. And along the way, because of the company and its values, was very involved as well in thinking about how we communicated with multiple stakeholders, including our clients, the communities in which we operated, and how did we take advantage of that natural diversity to leverage it to get to the best results for all.
And so it's interesting that you traveled kind of through this and then arrived in what we would think of as more of a traditional, HR kind of role near the end of your time. Mm-hmm. So that built on strategic communications, which I think is really relevant to what we're going to talk about today in particular. But I'm curious, how did you end up, or what was that transition into the world of engagement and inclusion and some of the stuff we would think more of as being related to HR?
It's an interesting question because in some ways it was gradual, and in other ways it was definitely a kind of a huge shift. It was gradual in as much as being the lead communicator for 3 CEOs in my tenure, because of their involvement. So one of our CEOs was head of the National Board of Trustees for the National Urban League. And so in the work to support him in that, but really make sure that we as an organization benefited from that. I created a whole communications, integrated communications and marketing campaign to get that done. So there had always been this thread of communicating about where we were as an organization relative to diversity and inclusion, but it was just part of as opposed to my sole focus. And so about 7, 8 years ago, the head of HR came to me and said, hey, we know you know this. Can you help us with our diversity strategy? And I said, okay, that's fine. I can help with the strategy. And I kept the rest of my comms portfolio. And after about 2.5 years of that, they came back to me and said, we really want you to do employee engagement and take over the whole operations and strategy, as well as communications for both engagement and diversity. But, it's too big for you to do all of it. So are you willing to make the change? And it was definitely, in some ways, a leap of faith. In other ways, just a very natural evolution to do that.
It's really cool because I think you are amongst the few people that I knew or know in the industry who had a role that encompassed both the inclusion work and the diversity work with engagement, which makes great sense to me in terms of those two things being intertwined. I think inclusion is certainly part of creating an engaging experience of work. I don't know how you pull those two apart, but I thought that was interesting that that did find, it makes perfect sense that you were the person to bring them together, given the work that you did. So I am curious, given all of that, in the role that you were leading at the end, what was it that you loved the most? What were you most passionate about in the work that you were doing over the last 6 years?
I think it was certainly the conversations and storytelling, and the two are related, right? When you get people to tell the story of who they are, it leads to conversation and connection, in that then you say, oh, wow, you did that? Oh, I did that, right? And suddenly you're having conversations, you're seeing some commonality relative to how you're all connected, but you're also getting an opportunity to really appreciate the other person as an individual, because in their story, inevitably, something's going to come out that you didn't know, and you go, wow, that's pretty cool. Tell me more. So I appreciated being able to get those conversations going through the storytelling, if you will.
Well, and we're gonna dive deep into that here in just a minute. But before I leave kind of this individual check-in with you, I have to know, what do you do for fun when you aren't working? Because I know you and I, one of the things I know we share in common is we love working. We love our work and we're passionate about our work. But what do you do when you set that aside for a minute? What do you do for fun?
I love to read. My mom was a librarian. She actually had a master's degree in library science, which was very unusual for a woman of color of her generation. And so from as early as I can remember, I was, hanging out with her in libraries and, intuiting some words and asking her how to interpret other words. And she was like, I will be so glad when you know how to read. So I think that's why I learned how to read pretty early. But I love going to bookstores. Even when we travel, one of the first things I like to do is find like a local bookstore and just hang out. But Reading is definitely one of my passions, along with travel and, of course, hanging out with family, and including our two fur children.
Well, two things in reacting to that. Number one is, it seems, I guess, you were predestined for work in communications, given being surrounded by words and books your whole life from the very beginning. And two, my wife and daughter are both voracious readers as well. They read all the time, and they, like you, anytime we travel now, we go into a new town, if we're going to be staying overnight or we're going to be there for any amount of time, the first thing they want to do is go find the local bookstore. So I'm familiar with that tradition in our house now. So thank you for sharing that. I really am excited to dig a little bit deeper into storytelling and how you have used storytelling as an approach, as a tool to further the work of building an inclusive culture within Pitney Bowes, driving engagement, a whole variety of things. I know this is an important tool for you. I am curious where in your sort of career journey you started to uncover the power or the insight that, hey, storytelling is a really powerful tool here to bring people together or to accomplish certain goals in your work.
You know, they say a lot of history is best understood in hindsight. So while it was contemporary, I'm not sure I really understood it. I just knew that there was something about getting people together and asking them questions about kind of who they were and what made them who they were. And in the various communication leadership positions I had, certainly on the internal communications side, we had an employee magazine. And so I would interview people for the magazine. And in interviewing people, as you well know, what you tend to get then are their stories. And so it was something about that process of, after I've interviewed someone, that I knew them better and we had a connection in ways that I think I just started to apply down the line, if you will. I think we really saw it come to the fore during the pandemic, where our humanity was brought into such contrast with the environment around us, right? Where there was fear and uncertainty, and there was sickness, and there was a real wow. And I think it kind of opened people up to having conversations and sharing stories and seeking connections in ways that it had not before. And we were kind of able to take advantage of that in many ways, just in the kinds of programming we did that allowed the stories to be the one to do the heavy lifting.
So let's talk about that, because I remember having conversations with you while the pandemic was ongoing about what you were doing internally, and in real time kind of witnessing and feeling the impact of that. And so let's talk a little bit about specifically what you did, the application of storytelling during that time to kind of bring your employees through that. And I also know it wasn't just the pandemic. I think you also were using it, as I recall, sort of during the George Floyd murder and that situation to create conversations internally as well. So can you break down what that looked like? How did you go about doing it? What was the actual programming looking like?
Yeah, a lot of that programming was, let me say it a different way. When you think about the work that we were doing even before the pandemic, or kind of the racial awakening post George Floyd, we were a company that really valued communications, which is what had enabled me to have this long career in communications. So we were known for, all the way back to the 1930s, this concept that employees held jobs, and therefore they had as much right to hear and understand what was going on with the company as shareholders did. So just like we had a shareholder meeting, we had job holder meetings. And so this concept of there's a certain amount of communication and transparency owed to employees was one that was pretty much an ongoing part of our culture, if you will. So when we came to the pandemic, but again, even before right before the pandemic, we were starting to do a lot of virtual or hybrid programming, because we already had about 30% of our workforce or so was doing what would be known today as flexible work, with a combination of remote and in person. And, some of it is by nature being a global company, but some of it was definitely by choice, where an employee could work it out with their manager to do that. So as part of that, it meant we started doing this programming, and we were doing this programming that we would stream worldwide so anybody could tune in or get it on demand afterwards. And say it would be bringing in a speaker, and the speaker would talk about, say, career development. And in the feedback, we'd get great feedback on career development. And then, say, a month later, we did it. But this time, we would do it with a panel of employees talking about their experience and how they progressed from this role to this role, and what they were doing and what they were thinking. And while both programs were highly rated, we found that there was just this definite preference from hearing the stories. And so it's like, okay, there was a whole range of topics we wanted to get underneath. So we did things like setting boundaries. We did things like integrating work and life in the midst of a global healthcare crisis. We did things like actually bringing in a panel of healthcare professionals. One woman was expecting a child, doctors of color, but different doctors with different life experiences, and having them talk about why self-care was so important during this time, and why at the time we felt it was so important that everybody get vaccinated. So we used people and their stories of what they were going through to get at broader issues. We did one about women on the front lines, and what is that like? Being on the front line, literally, of whether you are the lead income provider, or you're the lead caregiver, or you're a leader here at work. What does that mean to be on the front line, and what are the implications of that? And we had women in 4 different stages of life talking about that. But we just actively sought to find people willing to share their stories. And so we knew we were there when one of our focuses was on mental health, again, even before the pandemic. In 2018 into 2019, we had formed a committee on mental wellness. I was co-chair of it. And so when the pandemic hit, we had people willing to share their stories and to talk about it. And so we knew we were there when on one of our conversations, someone said, yeah, what I was telling my therapist, and this was a globally streamed thing. And we're like, okay, we've broken through when people are comfortable telling thousands of other people about their conversation with their therapist.
There's real power in that. And that's really inspiring, how you're sharing, sort of what happened or the stories of that. And I'm curious, as you were stepping into it, what did you find as, I guess I'll first ask, what did you find to be the challenges when you were starting down this path, or you were inviting people to do this and trying to unlock the power of storytelling? What were the hurdles you had to climb over at first?
I think the initial ones were actually getting people to share the stories. And certainly, I think the most difficult were actually the mental health journey. And because it is one of those areas that has had such a stigma around it. And it's like, hey, if I had a sprained ankle and I ended up in an air cast, people would come up and say, oh, what happened? Oh, let me help you. And, you get all kinds of support and assistance and empathy. If I walked up and said, I've really been struggling, my chronic depression is kicking in, and I've just been in a kind of dark place. I can kind of feel myself slipping there. I'm really looking for connection. People would freeze because they wouldn't know what to say.
Right.
Or what to do. So finding people who were willing to step up and say, hey, I have this going on. Like we had a high-ranking person talk about living with diabetes and what that looked like from a health and a mental wellness perspective. And it was just eye-opening. It was like, oh, wow. They have diabetes, So, but finding people willing to share, that's always the challenge.
How did you support them then in doing that? Like, did you help them think about the story? Were you kind of pre-gaming with them on what questions they might get asked and sort of what they might want to think about? I'm just thinking tactically, if I wanted to step into this, how would I support, how do I make it feel more safe for them to share their story?
Absolutely. We not only kind of pre-game with them, we were continually pre-gaming with our audience itself, right? So for them, it's certainly about, we only want you to share what you are comfortable with sharing. Understand that when you're sharing, you may never know who and how you impacted by someone by your willingness to come forward and do this. There may be people who don't understand or don't agree, and that's okay. And then they would hear us say to the audience and through the various ways we were communicating, what we want to create here. We can't control what's going on outside around us, but what we can control is how we treat one another here. And here we're going to listen to understand. We're going to assume positive intent. So, when someone says that, assume it's coming from a positive place. And when you ask a question, they're going to assume you're asking it from a positive place. But let's make sure that this is about listening and understanding, that is a judgment-free zone. And that's what we try to, we would often make that the opening for some discussions, but we also tried to thread that concept through a lot of our communication.
So I know you have shared that you felt like this approach using storytelling was instrumental in creating a more inclusive culture. And of course, inclusive culture happens on a person-by-person, sort of day-by-day experience basis. So I'm wondering how that showed up. So as you were using this, what signals were you getting that this storytelling approach was taking hold or was having an impact on individual employees experiencing work more inclusively?
We were getting it on a number of fronts. Certainly, we did a lot of measurement. So we would do, say, post-event surveys or feedback sessions and ask people, what did you get out of this? What value did you find? Did you find you know people better? You can relate to them more as human. You can do this, you can do that. And, trying to give them a range of things or actually I didn't get anything out of it or I didn't learn anything. And we found pretty much, in the post-event surveys, we were getting the feedback that, yes, this helped me understand, or no, I'd never thought about this before. We also, of course, did our engagement surveys, and not only the big annual engagement survey, but we know that life happens continuously, and an engagement survey is just a snapshot in time. So just doing it once a year is not going to be adequate, that you have to have other ways of picking up on that feedback throughout. And throughout all of those feedback mechanisms as well, we could see we had high scores, and we could see we were maintaining, and actually our scores went through the roof during the pandemic period for a couple years, where the scores went really high. I mean, and they were high to begin with, and they went even higher to the fact that our the third party that administered it for us said, we saw some gains for some companies during the pandemic, but this is way above what other gains that we saw. And we could attribute part of that to the storytelling, to the creating that safe space where people could just share and do. And we had leadership role modeling it. That was the other thing. When the leadership role modeled it, and then we saw other people, other leaders all the way down the line starting to do the same things without any requirement, without being asked, then we knew that we had somehow struck a chord.
So I'm going to ask you now, because after the 35 years, you've transitioned now into doing a little bit of advising and consulting and speaking and teaching and a bunch of other things, your new full-time job. I'd like you to put on your kind of consultant hat or advisory hat for a minute and help me think through how, if I'm an HR leader and I'm thinking about the upcoming year and we want to move forward and trying to make the workplace feel more inclusive and more engaging, where do I start with storytelling? What kind of steps could I take to start thinking about how we could bring this into our programming or into our approach next year?
It's a great question. When I think about some of the work that I am doing now, and it's for a variety of folks, both in the academic environment as well as nonprofits, as well as some for-profit. But the commonality is this: we are having to navigate some interesting times, to say the least, when you just think about the world and the rapid pace of, accelerating technological change and the global interconnectedness in ways that we've never experienced before, and the real need, the deluge of information coming at our employees from all sources. And, how do you cut through, how do you navigate through that and create a culture and get focused on where you're going and how do you get there? Well, one of the ways that you do that is it's a customized approach. It is understanding kind of where you are. So whenever I work with someone, I always say, so when's the last time you've got any kind of formal feedback from employees, whether it's a survey, a focus group, do you have a bunch of letters, any common themes that you're getting from employees themselves about how things are going or what's going on. And we start from there and say, okay, if this is what you're hearing from employees, now tell me about your strategic plan. So, because in your strategic plan or your operational plan, it's your roadmap to where you want to go as an organization. And they're telling you how they're feeling over here. So if you expect them to be able to help you get to where you want to go, right, then you've got to meet them where they are. You've got to help them understand how they fit into that bigger picture. And then we've got to get underneath why they're feeling this way. And we can get to why they're feeling this way if we do some work around how do they communicate with one another? How do they hear and understand each other? And are they hearing and understanding you? Communications has to be a closed loop process, So I can say it and you could have physically heard it, but do you understand it? Do you relate to it? Do you know what to do with it? Do you agree with it? So it really, I like to try to start with the culture and where they are, the business or organizational objectives and where they want to go. And then how do we create an environment to help deal with how the feelings are here to help you get to where you want to go over here.
Mm. And there's a lot there, right? There's some big feelings right now.
Yes.
And to your point, I love, one of my favorite things to do is, I don't do it a lot just because it's time consuming, but doing focus groups or doing sort of one-on-one kind of qualitative interviews with leadership groups and letting them share their story, because you learn so much so fast about what's actually going on in the culture or what's actually happening in the organization when you let people tell those stories. Like, it becomes very clear very quickly. And so that would be what I'd add on is, in your process, when you start to try to figure out how to connect those two dots, go ask questions and listen a lot, because that's where the answers are. That's where the real nuggets are. So, Sheryl, thank you for sharing all of that. I think that there's some incredible nuggets to get people started, or maybe thinking a little bit differently about how to involve or invite employees into some new ways of thinking going forward. So let's have two more big questions that I want to ask you. One is, what's a challenge or a significant obstacle that you're wrestling with in your work, whether that's work with a particular client or broadly right now, that you are willing to share with us?
Certainly, I think that there is a lot of, because there is a lot of uncertainty. There's a certain level of what's the risk to me as an individual, quite frankly, in stepping forward or doing this kind of work when there's so many who might misunderstand it, or outside parties who might criticize it, or, it feels like in many ways we're in a no-win situation. I've heard some clients say that. And to really be the encouraging person to say, I get it. I sat where you sit. And I actually kind of knew I must have been doing my job right, because there was always going to be someone who was not necessarily pleased, that I was not in a popularity contest. What I was trying to do was to help us all get to our best, to combine our best to deliver our collective best for our clients and our other stakeholders. So this is not personal, though it can feel very personal. This is, how do you get to the best answer for the organization? And to do that, you've got to have the hearts and the minds and the hands of all of your team members going in the same direction. And that's how you get there. And so to be encouraging and supportive, knowing that, these are times where in polarized times, it is always more of a risk to have an opinion because people get hardened around opinions, as opposed to the space in the middle we're trying to create, where you can sit, as you say, and listen with an open mind and say, okay, I can get why you feel that way. I may not agree with it, but we can agree to disagree without being disagreeable. And that's the kind of world I'm trying to help a lot of leaders navigate at the moment.
And when you say this work earlier, you're talking specifically about diversity and inclusion and equity work, I'm assuming.
I call it communication, quite frankly.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, all of us are, what I'm trying to get people to do is to use communication in order to leverage what we have in common as humans and what we have distinctly as individuals, and harness those two things into the common good.
Yeah.
So how do I make it so that we as people can listen and communicate in a way that helps us accomplish our goals that we all benefit from? And in a polarized environment, you often you see it as a zero-sum game. Oh, if you are gaining, then I am losing. Nope. If we could all gain, if we could all get to our best, then we can combine that best and move forward. No one says when you are an orchestra, and the average orchestra has about 100 members and probably about 20 different instruments. When there's a decision made to add another section, a different instrument, no one says, oh my gosh, now we're going to be ruined because now we're adding this other instrument or we're welcoming this other sound. No, what you get is this lush, incredible complex sound that cannot be replicated by any single musician or instrument. I'm trying to get organizations to play beautiful music together through the way they communicate.
Well, and I think what you just did is part of the work that needs to be done, which is framing this work as about how to create a better outcome, right? How to facilitate better organizational results. And I find it, I think, particularly poignant right now when we are in such a polarized world. And the reality is, if you have a large organization, You have people with all kinds of different beliefs and perspectives and backgrounds in there. Why would you not want to fully include everybody? Like, it's bad business. It's stupid management not to. And so it's counterintuitive. And I think we just need to be talking about it in a different way. We need to be helping leaders understand it in a different way, so that they can get, like, why would you choose to exclude part of your workforce? That's really, really silly and very wasteful. So thank you for that framing, because I think that's very, very helpful as we move forward. So final big question for you. And this is like, let's look into the Sheryl crystal ball. And I want you to think about work in 5 years. So, 5 years from now, when you think about work, what do you hope will be different about work than it is today?
Oh, now that's really hard, Jason. What do I hope will be different? I don't know. I would hope that certainly that we are not in the same place. Because sometimes it can feel, what do they say, deja vu all over again? Sometimes it can feel like, wow, weren't we just here like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now we're back, right? So I would hope that we are in a very different place where the kinds of conversation we just had is, yes, common, agreed upon. It's not the mark of high performance. It is the reality, right? And so that then we could do a higher level of work, because some of this, I do think, I agree 100% with what you said before, is fundamental. It just makes sense that every team tries to get as strong a players on the team as possible for the best outcome. And so if we can get beyond just that basic understanding, we start in a different place. And I think we can get to different places as well.
I'm on board. I sign on for that that hope, Sheryl. I'm with you. Let's make it happen. Well, as we close, I like to ask for kind of a check out. So, what one word best describes how you are feeling right now as we wrap up our conversation?
Hopeful. Yeah.
I like it. For me, it is grateful. So I'm grateful for you and the work you're doing. I'm grateful for the vision you just cast. So thank you for being with me. Sheryl, if people would like to connect with you, if they'd like to reach out, where is the best place to find you?
Certainly through LinkedIn. My name, Sheryl, with an S. It starts with an S and it ends with an S. So it's Sheryl Battles. SHERYL, Battles, BATTLES, or probably LinkedIn is probably the easiest.
Well, and I will include a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you. So, Sheryl, thank you so much. This was, as it always is, a delightful, fun, inspiring conversation. I appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you, Jason. It's always good to chat with you. So hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yeah, count on it. Count on it. Count on it. I'm not letting you off that easy. So thank you, and thank you for listening. I hope you can take some insights or some of the great nuggets and advice that Sheryl shared with us today and carry those back to your work and your workplace to make a real positive difference. We can shape a better future together if we take action. And also, please remember, check in with those who matter most to you. It may be the most important thing that you can do today. Until next time.